Good morning. So nice to be with you this morning. I'm presenting to a little bit different group than normal. As Bernardino just introduced, I'm used to presenting to a bunch of educators. And you all are educators of a different sort, so I'm thinking it's not going to be too much of a stretch for me. But I am here today to show my slides in the correct form, not just from the view there. Hey, that's a little better. So I'm here today to talk to you all about substance misuse supports in schools. And I saw already, and I'm really excited that we have some individuals in here that are serving schools directly. Can I just see a show of hands there? Who's working in schools directly right now? Okay, so yeah, you can woo. That's fine. Great. Thank you so much for doing that work. And that's what I'm going to be speaking to. I'm hoping to see more of you in the future raising your hands out of this group. But my job today is pretty easy. I'll talk to you about some of the work that I'm doing and the work that I think needs to be done. There's some pretty clear connections, I think, between the work of substance abuse counselors and what we do in schools, and as is the theme of today. The more that we can address youth on this topic, I think the more successful we can be. So some background on me. Bernardino already listed all the different titles and organizations that I'm affiliated with, so I won't go through that again. But I will tell you a little bit about my background. And my background, actually, my career started as a substance abuse counselor. I worked in adult outpatient settings straight out of college, and that was really formative for me in dictating kind of where I wanted my career to go. I wanted to be in schools. I wanted to do prevention work. And so here I am, a few years removed from that. I was a school psychologist in between then and now. And so I've had a footing in both substance abuse treatment and in schools. And so I feel like I have a unique situation from which to talk about how we can do this work in schools. Also, detail about me, I'm a father of 3, and anyone that is 3 or more children knows that you don't sleep much in that situation, and today is no exception to that. And I was going to joke, I am staff at the university here, so my commute wasn't too much different today, but actually it was. I got in a car accident. It's just, that's the luck that you have when you're going to present somewhere. So apologies if I'm a little bit higher energy than normal. So my goal today is to talk to you all about what schools are actively dealing with, and that's not just in Oregon, but across the country as well. And then I'm going to talk about how we know substance misuse is handled in schools, and that's there's only like a little bit of a flashlight on that at this point. I think we could do a lot more. And the last is how you all maybe can get more involved in supporting schools in the effort of prevention and substance misuse mitigation. And so I already asked this question because I was excited when I saw people in the audience who were working in schools, and so I'm not going to ask that again. And so my job here first is to give you some background on how schools are affected, and it's not because I don't think you all are aware of that. I don't want this to feel like I'm presenting to you new information, but I'm presenting to you information that I present to educators so that you know a bit about the context that they need coming in. I first talk about how students require substance misuse supports. That is not a big surprise to any of you in the room. But of course, early exposure is really influential in terms of long-term trajectory of student use and physical and mental health. We also know that peers can influence those risks to a great degree, and earlier use leads to oftentimes worse use later on. That was actually something I saw immediately as a substance abuse counselor, right? You interview individuals at an intake or an evaluation, and you ask them about their initial time of use. And 9 times out of 10, if they reported use between 9 and 12, they were some of the most acute, the highest acuity users of anyone that I'd come across. And so I'm sure that's consistent with your experience as well. And it turns out the research bears that out too. The next piece is that we have students that are affected, if they're not by their own use, by use in their community, in their homes. And so they're affected by the trauma associated with that, and that trauma leads to possible development of opioid use or other substance use disorders later on. Also, possible encounters with the child welfare system, which can bring about many different turbulent moments for our youth. And last, families need help coping. And this piece is sometimes I think, pretty easily lost because we have shifting family structures, and sometimes that isn't super apparent for school staff coming in. You see the same student year after year, but they might have a different person serving as their parent or guardian. And those parents or guardians that now are with them may not be the most experienced. They may have never been parents before, or they may be renewed novices in that role. And so they're going to need a lot of information, a lot of support to do the job in the best way that they can. And so I thought it may be helpful to share some trends. We've talked about some trends locally, but nationally I think it's important to have a picture of this too. And I'm going to ask for some of your participation with this as well, because it's boring just listening to me talk. You guys can think along and engage with it a little bit. So I'm going to ask you to give me a thumbs up if you think the trend for substance use over the last 30 days for youth, and it's 30 days, this is as of 2022. If you think the trend for illicit drugs is going up, you give me a thumbs up. If you think it's down, give me a thumbs down. If you're kind of not sure or you think it's pretty stable, give me a thumb to the side. All right. So illicit drugs, do we think the trend is going up, down, side? And I'm seeing a lot of thumbs up. And so you may be surprised at this one. The data indicate it's pretty flatline. There's been a bit of a tail drop in pandemic time, and that was a lot less social connection. But I would say there probably has been a bit of a pivot in the last several years in terms of the specific drugs within that category. But overall, illicit drugs, pretty flatline. Alcohol is going down. I just wanted to preempt that because I saw that there were some indicators that maybe alcohol use is going up, but overall that trend has really been plummeting over the last 20 years. How about tobacco? And that's just conventional form tobacco. Do we think that use is going up or down? I'm seeing mostly down, and you guys are no surprise. You're with the times. Tobacco use is going down, but how about vaping? There was no hesitation there. No hesitation there. Yeah, youth are heavily engaged with this vaping trend, and that started somewhat recently, and actually the Monitoring the Future data only goes back about 5 years or so on that. So that's what we've seen a tremendous increase in. And overall, that has some implications, I think, for what we think of introductions to substance use. So this is data that no one here has probably seen. This is data that I've only presented a few times. But substance use data in schools doesn't really exist conventionally, not at least widely usable format. So what schools do often when they encounter students that are using substances or possessing on campus is they record that in their discipline system. And so we talk about that as office discipline referrals, or ODRs. So my question to you all is, do you think schools are dealing with substance use more or less over the last several years? And these data only go to 2018-19. I'm going to ask you the same thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs to the side. What do you think? I'm seeing thumbs up mostly across the board. Some people are just unsure, just not confident. That's okay too, because you haven't seen these. We don't talk about these widely. What we have is a positive trend. That top line, which the colors don't really show up very well here, but the top line is the overall number of ODRs across schools, and you see years from left to right, and it's students per 1,000. So if you divide by 10, that's just percent. So 20 out of every 1,000 students in 2018-19 across middle schools and high schools were being caught in possession of substances in their schools. And what you can't really make out because of the lines, it was a dark green. That tobacco line is that solid line going through the bottom and rising up. That is what we're attributing most of that rise to. And so what I've just shown you with tobacco being on the decrease, what do you think is being categorized as tobacco in these referrals? Vaping, exactly. And vaping isn't just tobacco. We know that as well, right? Vaping is also a host of other substances that have been introduced into that. It's really just a method of delivery. It's not a substance itself. So that is what schools are dealing with, and this is what administrators have really struggled with in the last several years, because you can see the vaping instances have more than doubled in that 2-year window. All of a sudden, a lot more of their time is spent working with students who have this issue. And of course, the subsequent issues beyond that because of this early introduction to substances. So this has become a challenge that is very real, is very present for particularly secondary administrators in high schools. And teachers also don't know exactly how to help oftentimes. This is something that you might be surprised, educators aren't trained to deal with on a daily basis, and yet they're being forced to. This is something that's coming into their schools. So I've got another interesting question to pose to you, and that is, how many more students do you think are reporting use than are getting caught? Because all that was how many students are getting caught. Is it 2 times, 3 times? Just think for a second. I'm getting some shouts, but you're still not right. 7 times more. These data are from Georgia. Georgia has this excellent system across the state, which I would love to see replicated here, where they assess every school, every year, they have students fill out a survey about behavioral health, including substance misuse. And so I've got an indicator of substance misuse over the last 30 days. That is that dotted line across the top. That's the percent of students in middle schools and high schools that on average report substance use through that last 30 days. And this was going up until 2019. And then we have the ODRs across the bottom, which is specific to Georgia. So these are only Georgia data. And so what we can see is, 14% of students are reporting use, but only 2% are being caught in high schools with a substance. So we're really, really underestimating, I think, what we're dealing with in schools and what we're actively supporting students with in our schools. And so what does that mean? We've got a lot of students that aren't getting help, that aren't getting noticed, that could probably use your help. And the second thing is, we're going to need your help to help them. We are not trained to do this on a daily basis. Some schools are being more progressive with it, and that is excellent. We're investing in staff, we're investing in resources, in prevention resources, and in curriculum. But overall, this is something that's just kind of hitting us, and we're trying to respond. And so how are staff responding? Well, not so great. As it turns out, we have an overwhelmingly uniform response in that we're kicking students out. We're sending students out of schools, whether that be out of school suspension, which is OSS, or in school suspension, which is ISS. I probably don't have to tell you that this isn't going to be the most conducive to supporting a student who has needs. And this is a point of personal frustration for me because I've worked in schools with this exact issue. I was a school psychologist after being a substance abuse counselor. And in my first few weeks, I had what are called manifestation determinations. Any special educators in the room would know exactly what that is, but that is where we are encountering a disciplinary incident where a student could be suspended for 10 or more days or expelled. And so we have to go through and identify whether or not this is a manifestation of a student's disability, and therefore whether or not if a student possessing a substance is doing that because of a disability that they have. There's not a real straight line for that, and I ended up being witness to several students being expelled in my first few weeks as a school psychologist due to possessing cannabis on campus. And so I don't have to ask you necessarily what you think the outcomes for those students are, but I can tell you that they're not going to be positive, and actually the research support that as well. So I'll share that with you in a minute, but I can tell you that OSS is decreasing slightly over time as a response, which is somewhat promising. This is by substance type, so drug and alcohol are kind of tied there, but we're looking at 90+% of the time. Suspension is the option that is opted for in these cases. Tobacco, about half the time. For ISS, we're using that not very much for drugs and alcohol, but we are using it more for tobacco. One other piece of information about this is that we're actually worsening what we call the discipline gap, where we're disciplining students of color disproportionately more. And this comes into play for tobacco. If you look at the bottom quadrant there, we have white students are the pink line, which you can kind of make out there. We're suspending white students less than students of color out of school and more in school. So we're using that less exclusionary policy for white students, even though we're talking about the same substance type here. So we're worsening gaps that already exist in addition to just kicking out students as a poor practice. And it's a poor practice because we're sending students out who need supports with less supervision, right? We're sending them into the community. We are sending them out with no additional instruction or counseling, and we're damaging relationships. What is the message we send just without words when we're saying, you need to go home? You're not a part of our community anymore. And especially if you're being expelled, that's the message that my students received. And so long term, that has some very negative consequences. And I promise I'm not trying to just give you a downer. This is the sadder part of the presentation, because this is something that I think we can change. And you can be a piece of that. There are districts that are doing a lot of good work right now. Portland Public Schools, just up north a couple hours here, is implementing some really progressive policies to keep this exclusion piece out of the conversation, at least on those initial encounters with students with substance use. Because what I was showing you, those data are for first-time offenses for students possessing a substance. So it's not like these are repeat issues. So let's talk about then what my recommendations have been for the schools that are working with this. This is something that I think a lot of school leaders feel a bit unprepared for. And so again, I try to give the context for what are the general things that we can do preventively and in response that can do more than, say, kick students out of class. Really what I'm trying to present is just an alternative option. I think about this as, this is kind of the framework that I lay out for school staff. Like you need to consider two pieces. One is this foundational piece. We have a need for alignment of policies and priorities, right? We need to actually have time and funding allocated for people to do the work of prevention, to hire folks like you, per se. We need to have a discipline policy in place that doesn't allow for suspension, or at least really mitigates the use of suspension in cases, or first cases where students are coming in possessing substances, because those students, that's a very ripe opportunity to support, and we're missing it right now. And then the second piece of that foundation is we need to have a preventive framework in place. In schools, we talk about doing work more systemically so that we're not just kind of responding to things as we go. And oftentimes you think about that just as classroom instruction, but what I'm going to talk about is multi-tiered systems of support, which is a more cohesive frame for how we intervene with students and support students with different levels of need. And then the second piece on the side here is the points of engagement. And so we need to engage students separately, family separately, and staff separately. It's a cohesive approach, but we need to understand that all three of those play a pivotal role in how we can make a difference within our schools. And so multi-tiered systems of support, fancy word, acronym, nice triangle to show for you. Anyone seen this triangle before? Show of hands. Not just a triangle, this triangle? Okay, a few of you, okay. So this triangle, if you're an educator, is all too common, and it is great that it is too common. It thrills me that this is now a boring triangle. But what this triangle is communicating is that we have different levels of need for our students, and we only have a finite amount of support to provide. And so philosophically, if we are providing as much support as we can, we would love for the core support that we provide for all students to be sufficient for 80% or more of those students to be successful without needing additional support. So that would be that green band there. For students that might need additional help, we know that not all students are going to be successful with just a foundational level of support. We provide additional services and instruction. Maybe that's data monitoring, additional practice, additional check-ins with staff. And at the top level, we have our most intensive supports. Those would be our tier 3 supports. So altogether, tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 is how we think about that. And I say these things not because you're working in schools right now, because you might, and I would love for you to be able to speak the language and jump right in. PBIS, that was part of the alphabet soup that was introduced when I was introduced here, is positive behavioral interventions and supports. And that is the most common form of MTSS for behavior. And so if you're in a school, working with schools, and they mention that, just know that that's what they're talking about, is this MTSS idea. And so I've given a little bit of a snippet of what MTSS means. I'm going to give a little bit more concrete ideas. So when the support that we provide to all students for behavior, we're talking about teaching and defining expectations very clearly so that students understand what they can expect when they come to schools and what is expected of them. Those expectations and routines are taught explicitly throughout the school, in classrooms and in common areas, again, so that students have this, building the sense of safety, the sense of positive well-being, a sense of community that really makes school an attractive place to be. For the students that, that kind of instruction is not sufficient, tier 2 supports look often like, just additional attention with that student. We have an intervention called check-in, check-out, where We have staff that would take a student who's coming into school every day, is struggling a little bit behaviorally in class or whatnot. They have conversations with them. They set goals at the beginning of the day. Say, hey, what are you going to work on? What do you really hope that goes well today? What do you think you can do to help that go well? And then they give them a pat on the back. They go to class, and they check in with their teachers in kind of a similar short format way. Their teachers give them a little bit of feedback. Hey, how do you think that went? Oh, that's great. I think that went really well, too. And they go throughout their day that way. And you can see this is not a significant investment of time, but it is additional connection points, additional feedback, in a way that is standardized, efficient, and can be branched out to reach about 10% of our students. And so at the end of the day, they'll check out, and all of a sudden they've built stronger relationships with all of those staff members, right? We're talking about a systematic approach that can be pretty efficiently applied, and applied for students that have our similar needs that we're talking about today. And Tier 3 is going to be the more individualized supports. Those are going to be the supports. We have students with very high needs. They're going to be students that have wraparound supports engaged with community providers, such as yourselves. And you might be part of a team for local students in that capacity right now. Now, what I haven't talked about is how that pertains to substance misuse. And I realize that. It's just a slight aside. Because even though this is not directly targeting substance misuse, it is providing that safe and welcoming environment that we think can be protective, and some data do indicate that. As you can see on the slide, Tier 1 PBIS, that foundational level, is associated with lower perceived use by teachers and some lower drug-related ODRs. Some more recent research that I've just gotten out to a couple journals here demonstrates that self-reported misuse and ODRs go down when we implement Tier 2 with fidelity. So it's really promising, that level of support that I was just describing to you, where we're working more individually with a small group of students, seems to be effective. Now, these are correlational. It means that we don't know necessarily you do this, then this will happen, but it's promising and gives us an indication that this framework is a way that we can build you all in to provide some support for students with these needs. So, again, I don't need to tell you who you are and what you can do, but this is how I present to school staff who you are and what you can do. The first thing that I tell them is that they should talk to you all. You all have valuable expertise and knowledge to bring in. Again, educators typically don't have training on this content. So what you all can do, of course you can provide direct service, but what I've provided you with is a context where you can provide consultation and insight into evidence-based practices for youth as participants in MTSS meetings, right? That foundational piece, that Tier 2 piece, even that Tier 3 piece. How can we run these things better? What programming can we implement that's going to support our students better in being more resilient or being resistant to the risk that they're presented with? I talked to them about social emotional learning. This is what you all talk about every day. This is what I talked about every day as a substance abuse counselor. You're talking about, how do I manage myself better? Teaching students how to use positive coping skills, how to set goals. Those things are all associated with lower risk of academic failure, better positive well-being, and ultimately lower substance use. So I encourage schools to embed these kinds of skills and instruction in their school-wide expectations, into their Tier 1 teaching. I also, promote, mental health awareness as a piece of this. This folds right in. And then on the mitigation side, when students are struggling with this, using social emotional learning as an opportunity for targeted or intensive skill instruction. That's something that any of the counselors in the room doing that kind of instruction right now? Are you doing any targeted Tier 2, Tier 3 kind of instruction with students? Kind of? I'm looking at just the one that I know for sure was here. Yes. So it's just you're representative. Thank you. So yes, kind of. You're talking about that content, whether or not it's curriculum, right? You're talking about. Right. Thank you. Sorry for those of you who couldn't quite hear that, but there's a curriculum that they can go through, and some students may or may not fit into that. But overall, the students seem to like that, and it seems to fit pretty well, and they do want to come back and continue being engaged with that because it's relevant. It's relevant, and really reduces the risk that we're concerned about. Sure. Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. So she was saying that there are cases where there are students are self-referring. So the message builds that this stuff really helps for the students that are engaged with it, and all of a sudden their friends are like, hey, I think I need that. And it's like, yeah, you can probably self-identify that pretty well. Nice to work. Let's do it. Probably no surprise that I'm talking about this, since I spent a few minutes already talking about how this is excluding is typically what we do. We need alternatives for that. So alternatives on the prevention side, if we can prevent this, we provide additional supervision. We develop relationships with students, so it's not we're not unaware of students that are having issues. We can talk about those things proactively with them. And on the mitigation side, students are going to make mistakes. No matter how much prevention work we do, students will make mistakes, and we need to help them address that, help them learn from those things. We are schools, for goodness sake. We are here to help learn. And thank you. And so restorative approaches is a term you may or may not be familiar with, but it's all about building on the relationship. And you need to have one to begin with to really be able to build and repair later on when things happen. And of course, an alternative to exclusion would be referral to support for you all. One of the last couple points here that I recommend to schools is to engage with families. And this piece, I think, is a bit of a stretch for some schools, and some schools maybe just aren't as comfortable with it. But understanding what needs families have, so there's this two-way communication piece, what's going on for you at home, what do you need support with, but also as substance abuse providers here, you know what those needs are. You know what information is going to be most sensitive to get out to parents, for example. A lot of parents don't realize that their medicine cabinet is some of the riskiest area in their house. And a lot of them don't know necessarily that, that expired medication from 10 years ago could be the window to substance use for their students, in the next couple years. And it's that kind of basic information that we can provide, that you all can provide in partnership with schools, that can be just monumentally life-changing for certain circumstances, just on the prevention side. Additional training on supervision and engagement with their students is another piece. There's some great curriculum that are nationally available that serve that purpose as well. But here are some of the modes of family engagement that I recommend to schools, and that includes providing just newsletters, sometimes just getting the information out. That's low cost. Usually there's some boilerplate information that comes out from SAMHSA and from other organizations that you can just push out and transfer to your families and community. Drug disposal programs, if any of you have been affiliated with those are going to be monumentally helpful for, again, getting those high-risk medications that people aren't using, that people may not even be aware of, out of the home. And then Sharon, I think, was talking about kids need to have fun. Yes, they do. They do need to have fun. And so how can we provide the extracurricular activities that are going to be fun? That it's that healthy risk-taking. There's a need to take risks as an adolescent that we can provide within schools. And we often do, but sometimes, with budget cuts, we cut some of those away. And so if we can program more for things that are in line with what our community is interested in, we have a much better shot. On the mitigation side for family engagement, we can talk to staff, or we can talk to families about what we're doing in Tier 2 and Tier 3, engage them in the supports, make them a part of the support team. Oftentimes, they're kind of off to the side. School's going to do what they're going to do, and here, Mom and Dad, here's what we're doing. That's not the model that's successful. We need to pull them in and ask them, hey, what do you need support with? What do you think is going to work for your student? And then we need to give parents referral resources. And a lot of schools, actually right now, we've got a project where we're building in liaisons to community providers within the state of Oregon. So we have these staff whose entire job is to connect with families and connect them with resources that they demonstrate need for. It's fantastic. No, I hit the wrong button. There we go. Apologies. Last one that I'll talk about for recommendations, and these are very abbreviated. I usually go in more detail. I don't need to for you all. But emergency protocols are vital. I think schools that have not encountered an overdose on campus don't always see this as an imperative, but it only takes one. And that's the sad part. So for anyone that is working with schools that don't have this in place already, feel free to use the resource there. It's a SAMHSA overdose prevention toolkit, and it has an outline of kind of steps and a basic protocol for that. But staff don't know what the signs are of use, particularly for opioids. They don't know what the signs are of overdose. So being able to identify that alone can be really helpful. And so you all can provide support with that, knowing a protocol for who to notify, and then having an opioid antagonist on campus is just, it's a no-brainer to me at this point, especially with how we've talked about how ubiquitous that is now in the state and how many resources you can plug for that. Encourage your schools to do that. And so this comes to how can you all connect? Well, I've given you some ideas about what that connection can look like, but how do you do it? I was talking with Mary Krogh, who's the substance misuse kind of coordinator up in Portland Public Schools, and I was just trying to pick her brain, like what are the big pressing issues that administrators are coming to you with? And we talked about it, we ended up kind of distilling into a couple buckets here. One, school administrators need to know how they can respond more effectively to substance possession on campus. I've already shown you how the typical response goes, so what are the effective things that we can do? And then how can they navigate a massive shortage of providers, which has already been documented for us here today. And so thinking along those lines for how you can support in various ways, how do you plug yourselves in along these two frames, I would say. So of course, I think you can do it in a few different ways. So I'm going to say, as service providers, you all are invaluable. I think that's going to be oftentimes the automatic way that you come in. Schools are going to say, I just need someone to do this work for me right now. I have students that are in need. I don't have anyone to serve them. How can I contract with you? I think that's probably the easiest in for many of you, and that's fine. I think that is 100% a need. But I think you all shouldn't underestimate where else you can be helpful, because that prevention, that tier 2 support, we call that secondary prevention. If you can inform what supports we have there, I think we're doing much better. Even if that's only a sliver of kind of your FTE, your employment with them. You can also provide screening and assessment, right? We want to make sure that we're sending students to the right sources. Sometimes we'll have students come in and they possess weed on campus. That's all they know. It's like, this student had weed, this is a problem. At school, that's all they know. So how do you provide them tools for assessing the level of need that student has? Because not every student that's presenting the same way is going to need the same resources. Some students might need detox immediately, but some students might just need some kind of diversionary programming, psychoeducation along the lines of reducing their risk. You guys can be very valuable as team members. And I think as student care team members, anyone here been a member of a student care team where you've got one person on your caseload, you go into the school? Show your hands. I just want to see if we've got a few. Okay, just a few. So I think that's going to be more and more common, that you all will be pulled into schools and asked for, your job is going to be to frame what this use issue is for educators and how they can support them. It's kind of a foreign concept. We know how to instruct on academics. We know how to instruct on how to act in the classroom, but how to deal with much heavier issues often associated with trauma, that's something that we're working in teacher preparation to prepare better for that. And I already mentioned the systems teams that you also can support with. And the last piece is lending your expertise. I think you all can be invaluable collaborators for building like family education nights, where you promote awareness of what's going on locally in the community. I could tell you that as a school psych, I was completely unaware of what substances may or may not have been floating around my community, because that wasn't my world. That wasn't a part of what I was engaged in every day. As a substance abuse counselor, I absolutely knew what was going through. And that's where you can be valuable in talking to administrators, hey, this new substance is coming through, xylazine, for example. Your families and staff need to be aware that this is going to be something that's coming through. Here are the signs and symptoms that they might see in families or students coming through. Just that kind of awareness can up the referral numbers and get us closer to that prevention side. If you can provide that professional development to staff, that's a piece of that. But sharing even your community data is a piece of that, like your enrollment numbers, how many beds you have, how many beds are filled up and what they're filled up with. Again, having a context for we only catch about 1/7 of the students that are coming through. We may not have a real good sense. And so you might be asking, how do I get involved? Oftentimes there's going to be grants and things that kind of are a conduit for that. But if you have an opportunity, or if you think, hey, I could be really useful and your organization is allowing you to cut out some time for it, reach out to districts. I would be very surprised if a district turned you down at this point, because everyone's really concerned about this. No one wants to be the school with this issue. No one wants to have students that are struggling mightily with substance misuse and addiction. So ways you can do that, plug into the larger districts through their school website. If you don't have a contact, look at their student support services page. Look for a director of student support services or director of counseling. Those are going to be the people that can plug you in. In smaller districts, that might just be your district administrator or superintendent, or it could be your secondary administrators, high schools, assistant principals, vice principals, school counselors, and I won't knock school psychologists. They can probably plug you in too. So that is all I have for you today. I greatly appreciate your time. I hope that you all can get more involved in schools because we need you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Whoa, let me get away. Are there any questions for Sean? Okay. Luis.
I'm here wearing different hats, and one of the hats that I wear is I work with Multnomah County Behavioral Health in their wraparound program. And so when you talk about bringing teams together, connecting families to whatever wraparound program is in their county is a good way to do that, just as a suggestion.
Oh, great. Thank you. Is there a resource that you would plug in for Multnomah County specifically?
Yeah. I mean, if you just go to Multnomah County wraparound, and then there's it's an evidence-based model that comes out of PSU, and it's around the country, but it is a great way to get everyone in this youth's life, even the natural supports, community partners, providers, school staff, if they're involved in developmental disabilities, anything like that. You bring everyone to the table, and it's very youth-driven, family-guided, depending on the youth's age. And so you're getting that youth and family input, like what Sharon was saying, in terms of what works for the youth. So yeah, it's just a great way to kind of make what you're saying work.
And that tier 3.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've had tier 2 youth.
Have you?
Yeah,
Oh,
in my
excellent.
wraparound program, yeah.
Wonderful. Excellent.
So, yeah.
I'll have to expand my slides a little bit then. Thank you.
Got another question here, or comment.
So you were really careful when you were talking about getting the kits into schools. Can you elaborate on why you were so careful? Because I have a teacher that I spent some time with recently who there's Narcan kits in their school because it's a high-risk drug gang area. And she had an 11-year-old student who overdosed in her classroom, and she is high risk with autistic kids. And she had access to the medication that would have saved that child's life, and instead she had to sit there and wait for the nurse to come all the way across the first floor, up the stairs, and to her classroom to administer the Narcan because teachers are not allowed to do so in the state of Oregon.
Wow. I'm very sorry to hear that.
The little girl survived. However, she laid there for quite a while before anything was done. And the truth is that it doesn't hurt to have Narcan administered to you if it's not an overdose. I'm sure everybody in this room's aware of that. So I guess the question is, what do we do about getting teachers certified to be able to do that, especially in the high-risk areas where we're talking about 11-year-olds overdosing in our classrooms, and having to wait those valuable minutes for a nurse to get across the schoolroom or the entire school to come and save somebody's life and evaluate that child and decide that that's actually what's going on.
Goodness. Yeah, so I was not being careful. I'll say that. What I was saying was this is something that I think is a little bit politically divisive. People are maybe a little hands-off with it, but I think it should be in every school. That's my personal opinion. I'm not speaking for the University of Oregon necessarily there, but it is something that is, the risk outweighs the reward as far as not having it. So you need to, I'm so sorry about that instance. And training is something that I think is available. I think there are schools, I could be misspeaking, but there are schools where that's like everyone is trained, but that's going to be in those very high-risk areas.
Yeah, thank you. Just a follow-up comment. So I really appreciate, Dr. Austin, the slide you had up there with the harms reduction toolkit for SAMHSA. I don't want to mention that Oregon Department of Education has one too on their website. Ashley Thirstup, who was here, is instrumental in making that happen. It does have my name on there for context. And just to follow up on your comment, thank you for sharing that. When that harm tool reduction kit came in was to help supply schools with Narcan kits. There was a lot of education that needed to happen. I reached out to school districts, administrators. Some were very resistant having the Narcan in their schools, and it wasn't until they had outside of their community school overdoses that they said, oh, let's get them in here. And then there are some school districts that do have more than just the nurse. So there's a lot of education that needs to happen. And I think we have to have, unfortunately, those situations to really make it happen, to have Narcan everywhere and anyone administer it. We do have the Good Samaritan law in Oregon, and it protects you from anyone applying that regardless of whatever policy, administrator, police, governor, or whoever tells you you can't do that. So there's the Good Samaritan law that we also need to be aware of, that teacher could have applied it and be protected under the Good Samaritan law regardless of any policy. So I just wanted to share that. We have another question over there, and then I saw another couple hands over here. So quickly.
Thank you so much. Sean, I appreciate your comments, and I just wanted to add on. I work in Multnomah County, behavioral health as well, and with PPS. And I just wanted to echo your slides are great and your suggestions are amazing, but it also is we still have a lot of stigma in our community and our individual teachers and our individual decision makers in schools. And so even if a district is on board, your schools might not be. So it's really about building community. It's about getting back in there. When I think about tangible things we can do, when I show up at a school for a family night, I try and dress in the colors of the school. I try and be a part of their community and remember where they're at, and I'm coming to them and trying to pull them forward. So just another comment.
Excellent comment, thank you.
I saw a hand over here, and then one over here, and then we'll.
I was just going to address what you said. I'm from Douglas County, and my prevention department, as well as our ESD, put Narcan in every school and trained every teacher. They are allowed to do it, and it's not hard. It just takes somebody going into the schools for the training.
Thank you, and it goes back again to education, educating everyone, including administrators. We got one more here.
Sean, thank you for the information. And one of the things I like in this one, thank you for the word stigma. I saw that you use a lot misuse instead of are the words that really stigmatize the person who uses even one time or a million times. In the way you presented, and I focus on that one, but the other one is not stigmatizing or being so personal with the person. If they use, and it's causing problems, and not accusing the person as drug user, and giving those labels. And for me, the goal is to remove that from the stigma. And I believe once they focus more into the problems of removing that labels, it's going to be much easier for people to come and engage with us when they use and they know it's not the right thing to do. And a lot of things with adolescents or young people is peer pressure. They don't want it anyway. They know. So stigmatizing them or using those labels, they're going to feel bad. How are they going to relieve that shame? Using again. So that's my piece of it. Thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Sergio. We got one more there in the back. Jill?
So at the beginning of your presentation, you provided some data. What we don't have across the state is uniform data availability. Is there anything that this group can do or that can be done to advocate broadly through all school districts to be able to allow surveys for the schools or make them useful for administrators?
Well, that is not my department, unfortunately. I would love for it to be. I know that at the state level, it was last year we were talking with a team, the Oregon Healthy Teens Survey, which now changed names, is administered once every couple years to only a couple grade levels, and so you really get that hit or miss as far as you're never testing the same cohort except for maybe every 3 years. So it's incomplete and hard to use for decision making. So I feel you on that. I don't have an answer unless Bernardino does on whose shoulder we can tap and say, hey, we'd like some more data.
That's probably the student health survey that is administered every couple of years, I believe. Talking to those people, perhaps.
But I do think it was an issue of funding, is what we were talking about at the time. They were given a charge and they were able to do what they could with the funding they had, and it just wasn't enough to do every year.
It's not uniform across the state.
And states
At one point it was.
So, yeah, thank you. I believe, and I'm not sure, there's one hand over there, Jill might be able to answer it, but I think there might be a bill that they're working on to make it uniform. I'm not sure.
Ooh, I like that.
There was a bill that passed to require all schools to give the student health survey annually. It will start in 2024, so people can still opt out, but we're about to have a lot less frustration in our data sets.
Hey.
Thank you, Jill.
Applaud that. Oh, sorry, it's probably a little too loud.
So, thank you very much. I think that's all the time we have for comments and questions, and really appreciate it, Dr. Austin. Great presentation.
Thank you.